So having marked out the position of the red tile at the edge of the photograph, so I know that that's in the correct position, and armed with my repeat pattern, we can now paint in all of these squares, which won't necessarily be squares, they'll be more blobs, but they'll be good enough for what we're going to do. So we need to get all 5 of our colours out at the same time, 5 different paintbrushes, and then we're just going to spot the carpet. I've never done this before, so it's just an idea. We will see how it goes. We can always overpaint it if it doesn't look right. Okay, so I have my 4 colours that we need in addition to the red that's already down. I've just used colours that I've got to hand that are the closest that I can find. So I'm using a Humbrol 2, which is their emerald colour. I've got medium blue 70963, yellow RLM 04, which is 710780, and white 17951. But they're not necessarily perfect colours, especially the green is a little bit light, but for what we're doing it's good enough. I've got my 4 paint brushes, so using my repeat pattern, what we will do is just dab different colours as we need them, starting from this red, and what we know is that under the red is a blue. So I haven't thinned any of these. I want them thick so that they stay where I blob them. Blue, and then next to the red is a white, and underneath that blue is a yellow. Next to the blue, above the white, is a green. So we'll continue that across the entirety of this area until it's done. But as we look at it through the windows, that looks pretty cool. So I'll get that finished and I'll show you what that looks like at the end. So as you look through these windows at certain angles, you can see some of the inside surface of the curved windows, and you can certainly see the inside of this bulkhead here. Now, actually in this area there is like a ball pool or something like that, which has a net up the side, and it's all sort of blue. So I'm going to paint it blue, the same blue that I'm using for the sort of splash pool at the back here. And then we will use metallic 56 to paint just the inside surface of that, so that if you do see it is correct. Because on the picture I have, they have like a brushed aluminium or stainless steel type of covering on this area here where the windows are. So we shall do that. So for the splash pool at the back, we've used medium blue 70963, which is the same blue that we've used on the carpet and the wall there. For this bigger pool, we're using 70808, which is blue green, which Looks very similar to the reference pictures that I've seen. There are decals included that you can use for this if you prefer, but they have little black wavy lines on them, so they don't look like the tiled bottom. It's supposed to look like water movement, I guess, but I personally prefer to paint them. So this is model colour, so there is a little bit of thinner added to this. I've not quite gone with my 50-50 rule because I want this to be a little thicker, and then the second coat will be thinner. That's because I've not used a primer. Now right at the bottom corner, well, the bottom two corners at this end, there is actually two little drains, and what I want to do is just mark them in using a dab of this darker blue on the end of a cocktail stick, and then we'll paint over it with this blue and it'll lessen it. So that's the drains put in. So we'll just let that dry for a minute. I'll go and wash my brush. Now for the pool surrounds, we're using this Glacier blue colour, 72095. So this is a game colour. And you treat this paint like model colour paint. It's the same consistency. So, as you can see, we now have the composite deck painted in, the carpet accurately depicted, and we've painted in the pool area as faithfully as possible using the pictures. Now, all of this is a little bit open to debate because it depends on your light, what hue these colours are. But this is pretty much as close as I think you're going to get with it. Now, a couple of things to point out. This area here that we've hired isn't a pool. It's like a platform. It does get wet because there are some cannons on each side of the platform, and we'll be putting the detail on later in the build. So this shouldn't be filled with water. This should be filled with water, and this should be filled with water. Now, it's not 100% accurately depicted, the pool area, but it's too difficult to make the changes needed because they'd be quite fundamental. But we do get something that looks very much like what we see. There is, when you look at pictures of this area, quite a prominent black line that runs around the edge of the pool, and I'm just in the process of putting that on now. And to do that, I'm using this thin black tape. It's called trimline, and trimline comes in a roll with lots of different thicknesses on that you can cut to length. It's like a PVC tape, so it's waterproof. It's used quite a bit by radio control shipbuilders because of its ability to resist water. Comes in a massive range of colours. It's really handy stuff. I've got gold and white and red. Actually, I've mainly used it on car builds, so I used it quite a bit when I was building the old Aurora Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So all the red pinstripes were done using this tape. It's not very thick either, so you can get away with putting the tape on and varnishing it over it, and you wouldn't necessarily know that it was a bit of tape. So We're using the trim line to mark out the black line, and all we're simply doing is measuring the line, the tape to length I should say, cutting through it with the scissors, and then you can place it with your tweezers. Now conveniently the black line needs to go right at the top, so it's easy to get it straight, it's not part way down. And we line up one end and then line up the other, and then where I've got it slightly over length and it's going around the corner, rather than feed it round the corner and risk that it might come off later on, which it shouldn't, because the adhesive is really quite good, although you can move these things around, so you do need to seal it once it's on. I know that is not sticking up above the top, and that's all perfectly straight, and we'll just push that corner in, and then I'm simply going to take a knife and trim the end in the corner of the part there. And that can be removed. And I know we've got a black line that is to length. So I've got a couple of sections left to do, and then that's that pool area pretty much done until we put the photo etch on, which we won't do until we've built much more of the ship. And I'm past the risk of dropping something on this area and smashing it all. Okay, my next job is to put the two gaines areas on the deck, which will then allow me to seal the deck with a varnish. So we've got like a chessboard, and I'm not quite sure what that is, but they go either side of that raised platform at the back there, so let's get those on. Okay, to ensure that we have this orientated correctly, what you want to do is ensure that a white corner is closest to the pool and facing towards the bow, and then you'll be pretty much bang on with the board orientation. And it's just behind the lamp there. So my positioning is just behind the lamp, making sure it's straight with the pool there. Okay, I'm happy that that looks right. So we can now put the other one on. And on this one, they two blocks are at the bottom. So it's about the same distance from the bulkhead as the chessboard, which makes it further away because it's narrower from the lamp. So about like that. So that's as far as I'm going to take this before we actually put it in the hull. So we're just going to let the decals dry, then we're going to give it all a bit of a varnish up, then we can put it in the hull. I haven't forgotten that we've got doors to do. We're going to do those separately and put them on once this is already in the hull. So there we have it. I think the deck's looking quite good now, and then once we've got this in, we can have a look at sorting out the ladders for this. We also need to glaze that, don't we? I might glaze that once we've done the varnishing. So I'm initially going to seal everything in pretty much with a matte varnish, and that will get us where we want to be for most of this area. There is one or two things that we need to then pick out in gloss or satin, but most of it is actually matte. So all the floor surfaces inside and outside are matte. Now the pools are going to have water in them, so they'll become gloss. The platform at the back is also going to have some gloss varnish on it to make it look wet. But everything else is pretty much matte. And we can just pick out the wooden tops also in the mat. So we're mixing for the surround areas 50% glacier blue with 50% blue green. So that's 72095 game colour and 7808 blue green. 50-50 mix, and that's getting me a colour that is about right for what we need. Around the edges of the pool area, we have some natural wood that, when you look at photographs on the actual ship, it's sort of a grey-brown colour, and that's really the aging, the weathering of the wood being exposed to the elements that's doing that. When she was first built and released, the wood would have been a much more natural, fresh wood look, and as the wooden decks that we're using have that look, I wanted to tie this into the wood decks. So I'm actually using this is a Meng wood deck colour. They're much of a muchness, the wood decks paints, so it doesn't matter which brand you use really, other than the Tamiya one is very, very pale, and I recommend you perhaps don't use that one. But other brands of wood deck colour will do perfectly well in this area. So the main deck is this sort of middle stone colour. So we're using Humbrol 225 for this. Obviously the drying time is a bit slower when we're using enamels. But we'll get all that painted in, then we can paint the white in last, and then this is pretty much ready for fitting, other than adding some doors.
Two great French line ships, the Normandy of 1935 and the France of 1962, had very distinctive forecastle decks, where the deck was basically flat with the mooring equipment down below inside the ship. So the very fore part of the ship was completely clear of any encumbrances, and immediately behind this clear deck was a breakwater. On the Normandy, it was like a snowplough, and on the France, a somewhat different design of breakwater, much like a parabolic curve. But I chose for Queen Mary II to use a modern version of the Normandy style snowplough type breakwater, and this is up there at the forward end of the ship, and that's really so that if there was any water on that forward deck in a storm, and we call that green seas, that the breakwater would protect the forward part of the superstructure and help deflect the waves overboard. And in fact, we tested this quite extensively at the Dutch Hydrodynamic Institute of Marennes, where we did all the model testing, and it showed conclusively that the breakwater was very, very effective at dispensing any waves that happen to encroach on that forward deck. And it's because of that that we were able to have the marvellous superstructure front that we see on Queen Mary II.
Well, the paint is drying on our stern deck. We can now start prepping our promenade decks. So we need to remove all of these raised deck caulking lines and smooth it down, ready for accepting the wooden deck. So just like we did before, we're going to start that process by running a chisel to get rid of most of it before sanding down. So unlike on the stern deck, we don't need to get this totally smooth, we just need to get it smooth enough for the adhesive on the deck to go down. So it's really just chiseling it down as smooth as we can, and then going over with a relatively coarse grit sandpaper, just so that when you run your finger over it, there's no obvious lumps. That's all we need to do. So we don't have to get rid of all the wetness of these raised caulking lines. Right, that's one side done. I'll do this remaining bit of deck and get back to you when it's done. So while I give this deck a final sand, now we've taken all of these ridges off, I'll let Stephen talk to you about the promenade deck.
The wraparound promenade deck on Queen Mary II is very important. Firstly, it's the space where passengers are brought out from the muster stations inside the ship to actually embark on the lifeboats in times of dire emergency. It's also an important circulation deck, and the outside area is a complete wrap-round deck, and the forward end is enclosed. And this was important for me because, having travelled many times on the old QE2, I knew that the forward end of her promenade deck, you had to go up a flight of stairs and under the bridge and then back down again to complete the circuit. Invariably, when the ship was at sea, this would be closed off because it was always very windy up there and it was dangerous. So I wanted to adopt an enclosed forward end of the promenade, and I was inspired by one of my favourite ships, Holland America's flagship, the Rotterdam of 1959. Now the deck is covered with teak, like most of the passenger areas around the ship, and in fact the shipyard struggled to find enough teak of the required quality that we required, and so they sought out from all various sources around the world for the teak, and they were able to buy a lot actually from the Ministry of Defence that had a store of teak for the old Royal Yacht Britannia. Now that ship having left service in 1997, the teak was spare, and so the Ministry of Defence was able to sell it to the French shipyard. So in a way, we have part of the Royal Yacht Britannia's teak on Queen Mary 2. Now as you come out of the forward staircase of Queen Mary 2 on the port side and walk back, you walk under the various lifeboats, and there are 3 types of lifeboats on Queen Mary 2. There are standard monohull 150-person lifeboats. There are 2 rescue boats, one forward, one port and starboard, and these are quick deployable boats that are used if somebody or something is dropped overboard, and they can be quite fast deployed. And then there are the lifeboat tenders, which are catamarans, and both the lifeboat tenders and the ordinary lifeboats carry 150 passengers in their emergency mode. And the lifeboat tenders act for tendering purposes with a reduced capacity for passenger comfort. Now as we walk around the deck, not only do we see those lifeboats, but looking in, we pass the area at the forward end where the large health spa is located, and then there's a long length of that deck internally is the casual restaurant, which we call the King's Court. Other ships call it the Lido restaurant, but on Queen Mary it's the King's Court. And this is generally a buffet-style casual restaurant where in most places within the area you serve yourself various food stations and beverages, tea and coffee and juices and the like. And then at the aft end there are the 2 grill rooms for the suite passengers, the Queen's Grill and the Princess Grill, with a galley sandwiched between them. There's also a private lounge for the grill class passengers, which they can access before moving to their respective restaurants or grill rooms. As we walk round the deck, we notice a number of large wooden boxes on the deck, and these are used to store spare life jackets and also the cushions for the numerous wooden steamer or deck chairs around the deck. We also notice red square fireboxes, and these fireboxes are throughout the open decks, and they are where the fire hose is situated, and nearby there's always a fire hydrant and a metallic box with control and communication equipment nearby. We also see different types of bulkhead lighting. There are circular bulkhead lights, there are strip lights, and in some areas of the ship, but not particularly on the promenade or boat deck, there are some small pillar lights. But there's much to model and add to the detail of the Revel kit on this deck, because not only are all the details there that we've said, all those lights and boxes, but also the main entrance doors in and out of the ship at the various staircase locations. they're actually teak wood, and so they're not really depicted well on the kit. And so Jason will be busy making doors up to place on those superstructure sides. So this is quite a large part of improvement for the Revel Queen Mary 2 kit, and I hope you enjoy working on it with Jason.
So I'm happy that this deck is now smooth enough for the wood deck. So the next thing I want to do is remove the two staircases off the end here. We'll be replacing those with photo etch. So what we want to do is just take them off where these right at the top of the stairs, leaving the little rectangular tab sticking out of the back. So that's a nice simple job for our razor saw. And I'm going to cut it actually on the top step so it's slightly oversized. And then we can just sand that, make sure that's as square as we'd like. So that we have a little platform for the ladder to go onto. I'm going to guess that the wood deck won't cover that, so we'll be painting that bit. Now there's a little bit of the ladder underneath, so we need to just make sure we've got that nice and flat as well, otherwise it will look odd. So we square that off and make sure it's level with the underside of the deck. And one of the things we can do right now is, as you look at this, there is two raised lines. There's an outside lip and then there's an inside raised line. And that inside raised line is just for positioning the plastic railings, which we're not going to be using. We don't need that raised line there as a guide. So what we can do is just take that out. So using a fine chisel, we can just cut that out and remove that, and that'll just make that deck a bit more accurate. A little bit more care is needed with this bit because we don't want to put any dings or anything like that into the deck surface, because we want this totally smooth, unlike the other decks where it didn't matter quite so much, although we were trying to avoid it because a wooden deck's going to cover it. We're not going to have that luxury here. Okay, that's done. A deck that goes in there, and then we have a deck which is this large Promenade deck, which runs the full length of the ship pretty much, which then goes on top of that. Now, before we do that, we want to consider what is going on behind the openings that we made when we were doing the hull. So if you remember, what we intend to do is show these doors open, and so we need to have something when you peer in. Now, having had a look at the plan, there is not much actually to see behind here. We basically have a bulkhead which is running towards the front of the ship, and this opening here is almost the end termination of a corridor, which is coming down in a wedge shape. All will be revealed. So to make that, I'm scratch building 2 little bits of deck, and I'm starting that process with a little beam running between the 2 openings, which is going to be my support for the deck that we're going to put in. So you can see we've had to cut some chamfers on and keep sanding it until we've got it to fit correctly where we want it. And then we're simply going to use some liquid glue to fix that in. You can also see we've painted the inside of this area black. That's just to make sure that if you do catch something, you can't really see what it is. We don't want any white plastic reflecting if you were to look in, for example. Okay, so that is our support beam in. And then I've used some scrap card. Now the thickness is sort of irrelevant, but you've got to make sure that your supporting beam accounts for it. This is about 0.3, I think, that I've used, but it's not important as long as it's flat when you put it in. And the deck colour is going to be our US Air Force light grey, which we're using throughout the build on the steel deck areas. We'll be using it on this part as well. But in this instance, because it's an internal part, we can just brush paint that on. So I've already primed in grey the 2 deck areas. What we want to do is just plop them on. Because this is 0.3, it doesn't need a chamfer. So we'll glue that on at that edge there first. There we go. Let's run all the way along there. And we'll do the same on the other side. So that should be strong enough. And then what we will be doing is with another strip, and these are a centimetre deep. Again, it doesn't matter because we've got all this space to play with. We will just glue these in at an angle, and that will create everything that is visible through the opening. It's as simple as that. Because this is white plastic, we may not even paint it. We may just give it a matte varnish. Having said that, we might just give it 1 coat of paint just to be sure. So we're going to let that dry for a minute, and while that dries, the glue that is, we'll get our paint ready for putting on. Because this is model air paint, it's actually a fairly good consistency for brush painting right from the off. So to complete this scratch build of the mooring deck at the bow,
we just need to put the bulkhead in. You can see I've done that on this side. So I'll show you how I went about that. It's just a piece of plastic card, and like we've done with the previous bulkheads, a little bit of angle. And what we do is we clamp the two together using some tweezers so that we know we've got it upright and we've got it square. And then get the angle correct, which is going from corner to corner of our rectangular deck piece. And then we can just run some liquid poly glue in. We'll just hold it there for a sec just to make sure it bonds and stays upright. And there we have it. So when we look through the open door in the side of the hull, we'll see the white bulkhead, and at a certain angle you might see the sky grey deck, but that is all you're ever going to see. So that's all the scratch building we need to do there. We will be putting the doors on, but that'll be towards the end of the build when we're less likely to knock them off. So with that done, we can now look at completing the children's deck and installing that ahead of putting in the promenade and the forecastle. So our children's play area deck is pretty much ready to go in and be installed. We still have one or two things that we need to do to it, but we can do that from a position of the deck being fixed in place. So the last thing I want to do before we install it is actually to put some strip lights on the inside, which will be just about visible. Now, when you install this deck and look through those hull openings, you can just see the edge of this. You can see that it's white and not much else. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some strip lights out of 0.25mm rod. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint them a slightly pale yellow colour to make them look like they're actually switched on. So to do that, we are going to paint them by mixing some paint. I don't have a pale yellow that's suitable, so I'm using 71078, which is the RLM 04 yellow colour, Model Air. And we're just going to put a dab of that, literally a dab. And then I'm also using 70993, which is a white grey. Now this white grey colour is probably going to get used quite a bit for things like the bulkhead lighting and stuff like that. So just give that a good shake. And we'll have a little bit of that. We're not going to need much for this job. And then we're simply going to mix it together until we've got what we need. So I'm literally going to take one dab of the yellow and mix it in with the white, and you can see immediately that that has gone to a, actually that has pretty much gone to the colour I was looking for. And that doesn't need thinning, so we'll just paint a length of that strip. And you can see there that we've got sort of a pale yellowy colour. So I'm just going to get a peg and just hold that there while it dries. And I'll go and wash my palette, and then we can just cut some strips off and glue those into place. So we have cleaned up the main promenade deck, ready for installing the wood decks. and installing this deck into the hull of the ship. Now, the instructions want you to install the forecastle and then mount this on top. So you can see there's 3 pegs and 3 little mounting points, and when you do that, and it fits together fine once you've located those pegs together. Once you've done that, that creates that large stepped breakwater, which is such a prominent feature. The problem we have is that the join is also a bit prominent, and what I want to do is fill that. Now that's going to be quite difficult to do once it's installed in the ship. Now the fit of the bow itself, this forecastle deck, isn't an issue. So I know that I can attach it to this and fit all of this, and it's not going to give me a problem. So that is my intention. So we're going to glue that together, and then we're going to put some microstrip down there, glue that in and sand it flush, and hopefully that'll be all the filling we need. Now also, before we install this deck, I want to just have a look at this part here. So this part should be, this is J40, should be fitted in step 24, which we're a little way off, and that goes on there like so. And the reason why I'm looking at also attaching this is for the same reason. It's easier to get in and just sand the join while it's in this position, and I can get access to it easy. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to glue these together and then let the parts cure. I'm going to put plenty on the joining edge here. And just to help ensure they're squeezing together nicely, we'll just put a couple of pegs on. There we go. So we can let that dry. Now this part, we've got a lot of different touch points to glue together. So and all of this as well. So we'll just go around on top of that, put some on the pegs. And then that part can go straight on top. That doesn't need pegging at all, that one. So we can leave that lot to dry and cure, and then we can go and have a look and see what cleanup we need to do. Okay, the paint is dry on my plastic rod that is going to become strip lights. I'm going to do 3 strip lights on each side, nothing in the middle particularly, and we're simply going to snip them off with some sprue cutters, and I'm going to do them at about 5 millimeters each. So 1, 2, 3, 6. So that should do. And then what we'll do is simply place them with some thin tweezers and then let the glue do the work. So there are our 6 strip lights in, and we'll just give them a liquid poly treatment. Okay, that is our strip lights done.
So we're out of time for this video, and in episode 11 we'll be looking at fitting the promenade deck and getting that ready for fitting the wood decks. We might even get the wood decks on if we have enough time. We'll also be fitting the children's deck that we've completed in this video, ready for further detailing later on. We'll be fitting the forecastle, and we'll be having a look at this area here to see what else needs to be done to improve the detail, particularly replacing these clear parts which have a number of issues with them. We also, if we have enough time, will have a look at finishing the outer hull, and then we're ready to move on to all those rooms and balconies that we need to do. So Stephen and I hope you enjoyed the video, and we hope to see you in the next one. Take care everyone, enjoy your modelling, and until then we will see you very soon.